stories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer are now meeting in Downing Street ahead of the high-stakes Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, as President Donald Trump has warned that President Vladimir Putin has only one chance and threatened severe consequences if Russia fails to halt its offensive. Ukraine has launched dozens of drone attacks on Russia between Wednesday night and today, sparking massive fires including at the Volgograd oil refinery and wounding 3 people according to local officials. Governors in Russia confirmed the attacks and damage on Telegram. However, Ukraine has not commented on these strikes yet. The Israeli military announced that it has approved a new offensive framework for Gaza City, with Army Chief Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir and endorsing the plan amid an escalating airstrikes that Gaza officials say killed at least 75 people in just one day. Hamas has condemned the aggressive incursions, warning of a scorched earth policy. India and China are in talks to resume border trade after a 5-year hiatus. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will be visiting India next week for high-level talks with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval on border issues, ahead of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's trip to Tianjin for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. A UN commission has found that systematic violence against Syria's Alawite community in their heartland likely included war crimes. According to official findings, the report has said that the government forces and allied groups were responsible for much of the sectarian bloodshed, according to media reports. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Washington looks forward to cooperating with Pakistan on critical minerals and hydrocarbons, according to State Department statement on Pakistan's Independence Day. This comes after both countries celebrated a trade deal last month that Pakistan said will lower tariffs and boost investment, reported media reports. At least 40 people have died in Sudan's Darfur region amid the country's worst cholera outbreak in years, Doctors Without Borders, known as MSF, has said. MSF has also warned that the year-old outbreak is hitting hardest in Darfur, already devastated by more than 2 years of fighting between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, according to media reports. Local authorities have confirmed a 3rd death from Spain's wildfires after a firefighter passed away in the Leon region, bringing the toll from this summer's blazes to 3, according to local official statements. Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska said almost 6,000 people have been evacuated, as 199 wildfires have already scorched 98,784 hectares this year. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at Downing Street just a day before the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. The London meeting aims at coordinating positions and reinforcing support for Ukraine ahead of the Alaska talks. Starmer has reiterated the UK's willingness to increase pressure on Moscow if it refuses a ceasefire, and praised President Trump for creating what he called a viable opening to end the war. Kyiv has voiced concern over being left out of the summit, as Putin is believed to be demanding control over remaining Ukrainian-held parts of Donbas, a condition Zelensky has firmly rejected under Ukraine's constitution. In a joint statement, the European-led coalition of the willing, co-chaired by Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, warned that borders cannot be changed by force and called for stronger sanctions if Moscow fails to engage in Alaska. Now, for this discussion, we are joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School. Joins us live from Bulgaria. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, do you think that this Ukraine's exclusion from the upcoming summit weaken its position in the diplomatic process?
Yes, ideally Ukraine should be on the table at any discussion about ceasefire, even more about territory. So it's unfortunate that Zelensky is not in Alaska tomorrow. And for that matter, that meeting will be useless. I already said many times, there is no point to meet between Trump and Putin. It will deliver very little in all expectations. Well, unless Donald Trump wants to receive a Nobel Peace Prize, he can do two things. One is to arrest Putin on arrival and deliver him to a tribunal. That will end the war because it will create a vacuum of power in Moscow. And that's the best thing Trump can do in Alaska. Or the second thing he can do is simply ask Putin to make a phone call to his generals and to tell them to stop the fire immediately. If Trump does one of those two things, either arrest Putin on arrival or order him to make a phone call to stop the fire in Ukraine, then yes, this will be a result. Any conversation out of that, any discussion about territory are useless, as I said. I wouldn't be even watching those. So the meeting in London is important because Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, but also yesterday, the video call between all European leaders with Donald Trump were very important, for that matter, to show to Donald Trump how united is Europe, the European Union, but also NATO members. And simply to tell Donald Trump, don't negotiate anything with Putin. No territorial discussion should happen tomorrow in Alaska. Just tell Putin to stop the fire, something we are telling him for the last 7 months. By the way, the call for ceasefire goes back from February by Donald Trump, accepted by Zelensky, rejected by Putin. So all Donald Trump should do tomorrow is to make Vladimir Putin stop the fire. And if that doesn't work, then serious additional sanctions, but also sanctions, secondary sanctions on states that continue to trade with Russia should follow.
And Professor, now you've also mentioned that the growing pressure on Russia, particularly from the European-led coalition, do you think the threat of stronger sanctions will be enough to convince President Putin to make concessions tomorrow?
Well, the Europeans do their best, and they already imposed sanctions for 11 years. Since the Crimea annexation are the sanctions imposed by the Europeans to various Russian individuals and companies. And they were much, much stronger after the invasion, the full-scale invasion in 2022. Europeans did everything possible to limit the Russians to develop weapons and to stop trade. All the European countries stopped trading with Russia a long time ago. The problem with the sanctions are not that Europeans should do stronger sanctions. The problem with sanctions is other countries in the global south, India including, China, Brazil, and other countries, they should impose sanctions on Russia. Sanctions don't work if half of the world impose them and the other half of the world is ignorant and doesn't care and make money out of the war in Ukraine. So the question should go to those who continue and even double and triple the volume of their imports from Russia. Those countries need to be held accountable and responsible for the continuation of the war. Europeans did very well so far. My country, Bulgaria, stopped immediately all the import. 90% of the Bulgarian import was Russian oil and gas. We stopped that and we found alternative sources. Well, with some initial hardship, but after that everything went well. Everybody else should do exactly the same as Europeans did.
And Professor, what are the potential consequences if the sanctions fail to produce desired results?
Yes, you're right. If China, India, Brazil, and other countries continue to buy Russian oil, that means more money for Vladimir Putin. And that more money for Vladimir Putin will be given to North Koreans to buy more soldiers and more drones, will be supply the battlefield with more weapons and drones. So exactly, buying Russian oil and gas and other products means prolongation of war and more people will die. That's exactly why everybody in the world should think about and stop trading with Russia. And remember Iraq, Kuwait in 1990 when all the world globally imposed sanctions on Iraq, and after 12 years, Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. Those sanctions did work. Sanctions against Libya did deliver the terrorist suspects to tribunal. The sanctions before that against South Africa did work by slowly but changing the dynamics in South Africa and finally having the Nelson Mandela in power. So sanctions do work, but they need to be global, imposed by the entire world, and continuous until the result is there.
Yes. Professor Popovsky, thank you for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay in the topic now. Russia is preparing for a high-level diplomatic mission with Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov, announcing that the official delegation will include Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov himself, First Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov, Finance Minister Anton Siluanov, Russia's special envoy and head of its sovereign wealth fund, Kirill Dmitriev, will participate in the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska tomorrow. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Vasilin Popovsky. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, with key figures like Andrei Belousov, also Kirill Dmitriev attending, what role do you think Russia's economic and financial interests will be during this summit?
Yes, obviously the delegation is large, and Putin would like to show this is a normal bilateral meeting discussing future cooperation between Russia and United States. That's why the delegation looks kind of normal. But all these are war criminals. Let's not forget. Everybody in the Russian government is a war criminal. And they will try to, exactly, you're right, they will try to project it as a normal meeting where the future of the Russian-United States relationship, even Putin is a globalist. He would like to show himself as somebody discussing the future global order. And all of this will be ridiculous because we know who is Putin, we know who are the rest of his people. These are war criminals, these are aggressors. And the whole summit is absolutely ironic because it is the same as if in 1945, US president after Roosevelt is meeting the Nazi leaders, Hitler and Himmler and Göring all together. So Donald Trump put himself in a very difficult position here because he will be obviously flattered by the Russians, who would like to show to the world that everything is normal. And he has very little space to maneuver because he's aware what the rest of the world thinks about this charade, about this circus in Alaska, and nothing is going to happen. Obviously, that there could be some promises for ceasefire, so let's watch that, whether the meeting in Alaska may produce a ceasefire, a 30 days, even limited ceasefire on airstrikes, for example. That could be a first step to some future negotiation, but obviously then Ukraine and the Europeans should be on the table for that. So if there is a ceasefire tomorrow, announced by the Russian president, that's the only news that matters. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next news as well. Now we stay on the topic. Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov confirms the itinerary for the Putin-Trump summit tomorrow. The program includes one-on-one talks with translators, wider meetings with delegations, working breakfasts, discussions on sensitive issues, trade and economic cooperation, Ukrainian crisis regulation, and will conclude with a news conference at the end. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Vasilin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, what does this signal about Russia's priorities in the ongoing diplomatic discussions and its approach to broader geopolitical landscape?
We'll try to make this meeting to look as normal as discussing trade relationship between the United States and Russia, and maybe some even global issues. They may even include in the agenda issues in the Middle East, Iran, and other topics. But again, the most important thing here, will Donald Trump coerce Vladimir Putin to stop fire in Ukraine? And that means everything. If he doesn't, that means more sanctions on Russia. So all the Russian plans to talk about trade relationship will fall down if Donald Trump say, no, I will stop trading with Russia. No more negotiation. It's only one meeting. And if Putin doesn't stop the fire, then a lot of sanctions will follow up on Russia. So Russia may make a lot of plans, but this will not materialize if Donald Trump wants to stop the war. In fact, if he doesn't, then the war will continue. This is against all the promises that Donald Trump made 7-8 months ago. The only way to stop the war is to tell Putin, stop fire, otherwise there will be severe consequences and sanctions. So all this big delegation with trade minister going to Alaska is basically a photo opportunity. They want to be photographed in Alaska as a big delegation, going out of isolation, because nobody in the world ever invited this big delegation from Russia.
Yes.
Apart from North Korean and Chinese, but the rest of the world is definitely not inviting aggressors and war criminals on their land. Trump is, unfortunately.
Yes, Professor, we will come back to you as we stay on this topic. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Russian Defense Ministry has said that the Russian forces captured Iskra in Ukraine's Donetsk region. Moscow claims troops took control of Scherbynivka in Ukraine's Donetsk region. The gains come amid continued heavy clashes across Donetsk. Belgorod region governor Vyacheslav Gladkov says a Ukrainian drone struck the regional government building on Thursday, shattering windows but causing no casualties. In a video message, Gladkov said he was nearby when the strike occurred and described only minor damage. Separately, he confirmed 3 people were injured earlier in the day when a drone hit a car in Belgorod city, setting it ablaze. One man is in serious condition with multiple shrapnel wounds, while his wife and a 3rd victim also required hospital treatment. Gladkov said the attacks were part of a wider wave of Ukrainian drone strikes on the region in recent days, which have also wounded several civilians and damaged infrastructure. Ukraine has carried out a 2nd consecutive drone strike on Russia's Volgograd region, hitting the Lukoil refinery, according to Regional Governor Andrei Bocharov. He said debris from intercepted drones sparked an oil spill and fire at the facility. Though no casualties were reported, airport operations were temporarily restricted overnight. Russia's defense ministry claims 9 drones were destroyed over Volgograd as part of a wider barrage of 44 UAVs launched, mostly targeting border regions. The refinery, a frequent target, has been hit multiple times this year. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Vasilin Popovsky. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, what are we to make of these continuous attacks from both sides, from Russia to Ukraine, Ukraine to Russia? Is this like a form of retaliation or a pressure from both sides to both sides?
Yes, you're right. The strikes go both sides, but they're very different as what is targeted. In the case of and military targets, it's one thing, and it's a country defending itself against aggression. Ukraine is defending itself against aggression, and it only targets military sites and obviously supply routes and oil refineries. These are all military targets. What Russia does is primarily targets civilians. So see, we don't see news of much Russian civilians injuries and that, but we see a lot of news about Ukrainian civilians because Russia is targeting cities in large numbers. So it also shows that if Russia violates the international humanitarian law, Ukraine, a defending country, is trying only to hit the military target. So it's a very way of different conduct of war as well. So not only Russia is the aggressor, but Russia is also war criminal here, where Ukraine is in its right to self-defense, and it obviously has the right to self-defense. It has the right to hit military targets, even those in the Russian territory, by the way. Ukraine, under international humanitarian law, can hit every single Russian refinery, transportation, bridge, and everything else that supports the military campaign in Ukraine. So that's a very, although they look very similar, they are very different in terms of justification under the international humanitarian law. What Ukraine does is absolutely justified. What Russia does is totally illegal.
Thank you very much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news on this topic. Now we move on to Middle East. Israeli far-right Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has approved plans for a controversial settlement project that would split East Jerusalem from the occupied West Bank, a move his office says would bury the idea of a Palestinian state. The E1 plan, frozen since 2012 due to international opposition, would see over 3,400 homes built between the Ma'ale Edumim settlement and Jerusalem. Peace Now warned the plan is deadly for Israel's future and a two-state solution. Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand sanctioned Smotrich in June over his support for settlement expansion. Construction still requires approval from Israel's High Planning Council, but infrastructure work could begin within months if passed. Most of the international community views settlements in the West Bank occupied since 1967 as illegal. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor of Weekly Blitz, joins us live from London. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. Good to see you. Thank you. Now, with this approval of E1 settlement plan by Israeli Finance Minister, how do you see this move, particularly with those who have long advocated for a two-state solution in the Middle East as well as Europe?
Yes, I think one has to take Mr. Smotrich's comment at the moment not very seriously. Let me explain why. His own popularity has been on a spiraling downward trajectory for the last several weeks. A very recent poll was undertaken that if there was an election now, Smotrich would probably lose his seat and his party's numbers would decline dramatically in the Knesset. So I think the statement coming at this time, and as you quite rightly pointed out, without any government approval, is really designed for Mr. Smotrich's own political survival and to appeal to the more extreme elements of his political base. So apparently he is holding, or scheduled to be holding, a press conference later today. I haven't yet been given the official timing on this, but obviously I shall be listening in. But I think the timing of his statement is really to appeal to the more extreme elements of his customer base and has had no official sanction from any other government minister or member of the Knesset. So at the moment, it looks like he's gone out on a limb trying to appeal to, as I say, those more extreme elements within his base.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. According to the reports, Israel is in talks with South Sudan about the possibility of resettling Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. The discussion forms part of Israel's broader efforts to facilitate mass immigration from Gaza following a prolonged and devastating military offensive against Hamas. Critics, including Palestinians and international rights groups, have raised concerns about potential forced displacement and violations of international law. South Sudan has firmly denied engaging in any talks with Israel regarding the resettlement of Palestinians. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz. Thank you, Peter, for staying with us. Do you think such move or such indications by Israel, could this lead to new waves of protests within and outside of Israel? And how might it affect the already fragile peace efforts?
Yeah, I think Israel has become very used now to international protests. So that won't necessarily bother the current Netanyahu government. What is more interesting is we know that discussions are going on with South Sudan, which has vehemently denied such discussions are being undertaken, but they certainly are behind the scenes. And I may add, it's not only South Sudan that is in conversation with Israel about the potential resettlement of Gazans. There are at least 3 other countries that I know of that are having such discussions. And really, this is just a continuation started by the UK government when they wished to resettle illegal immigrants in Rwanda, a scheme which was stopped by the incoming government but has now being talked about again, and no different from what Donald Trump is doing with ridding the USA of illegal immigrants from their border towns and going into various countries in South America. So this idea of resettlement, whether it be an illegal immigrant population or a settled population, is gaining traction worldwide. And as I say, it's not only South Sudan that are on discussions with Israel about this, but other countries, certainly on the African continent, who are friendly towards Israel, who are contemplating doing this.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you and we stay in the topic. Now we stay in the Middle East. The Houthis in Yemen have claimed responsibility for a ballistic missile attack on Israel this morning, saying they targeted Ben Gurion Airport. The Israeli military confirmed intercepting the missile over the Red Sea with no sirens sounded in line with protocol. Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Saree said it was a Palestine II hypersonic ballistic missile. Here's what he has said.
الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية نوعية استهدفت مطار اللد في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي نوع فلسطين 2، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله.
The Iran-backed group has launched multiple attacks on Israel since the Gaza war began in October 2023, pausing only during a 2-month ceasefire. Israel has responded in the past with strikes on Houthi-held ports and Sana'a airport. Now for this discussion, we go back to Peter Baum. Thank you, Peter, for staying with us. Now, given the Houthis' claim of responsibility for these continuous missile attacks on Israel, how do you think this escalates the broader regional tensions, especially with Iran's involvement?
I don't think it does. This has been, I think I've got these statistics right, the 7th such attack in the last 8 weeks, which have failed dramatically. As you quite rightly pointed out, the normal protocol is for sirens to go off and for the Israelis impacted in the affected areas to go into their bunkers. The trajectory of this particular missile, as with 4 previous missiles, was intercepted very, very quickly, and the Israeli authorities determined quite rightly that there was no need to set off the air raid sirens and for the Israelis to go into their bomb shelters. The attacks are becoming less frequent from the Houthis, which is a clear sign that the number of ballistic missiles that they have is gradually wearing out. I was actually on the phone to a colleague in Jerusalem at 2 a.m. this morning UK time, 4 a.m. Israeli time, when the missile went off, and she thought that she would have to go into her air raid bunker only to be given a message on her phone that the missile had been successfully intercepted. Now, what was equally as interesting, I think, was just before this missile attack, a ship going into the sailing from Djibouti and on its way to Yemen with 750 tons of weapons on board was intercepted by the anti-Houthi Yemeni government in waiting, let's put it that way, and the crew taken prisoner. There is no doubt about it that these weapons, that the Houthis are running out of weaponry, ammunition, explosive and ballistic missiles, and this was just another military setback for them, the fact that such a large shipment, which apparently was supposed to be electrical equipment and generators, but was in fact Iranian made and supplied missiles, was intercepted, and the anti-Houthi Yemenis have now taken control, and I'm sure they're getting quite a lot of information about this. So at the moment, going back to your original question, how does it affect the dynamics in the Middle East, both military and politically?
Yes.
The Houthis are really under severe pressure, both diplomatic and military, and seem to be failing in their objectives to create havoc in Israel.
Thank you very much, Peter Baum, for joining us and sharing your insights.